Welcome, I'm Suzanne Phillips. Thanks for joining me again on Psych Up Live. The name of our show today is Till Divorce Do Us Part, Coping with Divorce. While there are a little less than 50% of couples divorcing, the U.S. is still home to the most divorces. According to the CDC, the current nationwide divorce rate is 42%. Well beyond the numbers are the people, the families, the children, the lawyers, the feelings, losses, trauma, and possibilities that come with divorce. Today, we will be considering strategies, steps, and the resilience needed to deal with divorce. We are so fortunate that our guest today is Oona Metz, a licensed social worker, a certified group therapist, and a nationally recognized therapist, writer, and speaker who specializes in treating women navigating divorce. With over 30 years of clinical experience, Oona leads 4 weekly divorce support groups and is the founder of the Beacon Group Fellowship, which trains mental health clinicians throughout the country to lead divorce support groups. Oona has published essays in the Psychotherapy Networker, Cognoscenti, Social Work Voice, Social Work Advocates, and other outlets. Her new book, Unhitched, The Essential Divorce Guide for Women, will be published by Simon & Schuster and available this January 2026. Oona lives near Boston, Massachusetts with her partner and a handful of pets. As she says, her young adult children have flown the coop, but they still visit. Oona Metz, it's my privilege to welcome you to Psych Up Live.
Thank you so much for having me, Suzanne. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Okay, so your book starts out by suggesting that there are 3 ways a divorce begins. What are they?
Well, one way is that you make the decision yourself. The second way is your spouse makes the decision. And the third way is that you come to a mutual decision to divorce. And I think some people think that some of those ways are more painful than others, but I would say that every way that people come to the decision to divorce is painful. It involves some kind of heartbreak.
I would agree with you. I would agree. Whether you're the initiator or the one who hears that it's over,
That's
you're in
right.
pain.
That,
Something you once believed in is over. Yeah.
that's right. That's right.
So interesting in the notes about your new book is that women initiate more divorce than men. Now, why do you think that's the case?
That's right, Suzanne. In straight marriages, actually, the research shows that 70% of divorces in the US are initiated by women. And I do have some thoughts about that. One of the thoughts I have is that I think there's a real difference between leaving a marriage and ending a marriage. And in the support groups that I see, a lot of the women describe that their husbands have left the marriage in some way. They've left through infidelity, they've left through financial abuse, they've left through being extra critical or in some way not upholding the vows of the marriage. And yet the marriage is still a good deal for them. So they may have left in some ways the marriage, but they're still sitting on the couch. And
Mm.
so I think the women end up, in many cases, then having to kind of do the work. They struggle to try to fix the marriage, to improve things, to improve the communication. And when it doesn't happen, they then make the decision. And I think women tend to be more active overall in relationships. The fact that 70% of divorces are initiated by women doesn't mean that women aren't invested in marriage, right? Or relationships. But I think it does mean that they tend to be more active in kind of propelling relationships forward, whether that means coming together or, needing to come apart.
Mm. So, in some ways, the reality count is the old 50s stereotype of he's having an affair with the secretary and the marriage is going to end. You're saying women have taken the perspective if this is really a non-marriage and there's nothing really happening that's good and wonderful between us, how can this be good for any of us?
Right. That's right. That's right.
The question is women second guessing that. How dare they be the one to initiate? How
Right.
dare they do this to their children? And how they dare they do this to him?
That's right.
So, in some ways, this is a situation filled with a very big mix of feelings.
Oh, huge amount of grief. And what I have found is that, women do not do this impulsively. They do not make this decision impulsively. The women who come to my support groups have been thinking about divorce for a very long time
Mm,
and trying to make things better for a very long time. Our society still really counts on women or expects women to be the ones who hold the family together. And we see that in the research all the time of the amount of emotional labor, parenting labor, household labor that women are still doing more than men,
mm.
even in this day and age.
Well, in the women in your groups who have initiated it, traditionally, are they ending up with the children, or are children now more likely to share two residences if that's what happens in the aftermath of the divorce?
Most often it's a shared custody situation,
Mhm.
and sometimes 50-50, sometimes not, but most of the time there is shared parenting time.
Mm. Now, one of
Actually,
the
we're
things,
trying we're trying to get away, Suzanne. We're trying to I'm catching myself because we're trying to get away from the term custody because it has its roots in slavery. So
mm,
we're trying to replace that with parenting time.
oh, much better, much better.
So
So, one of the things you talk about is the wide range of feelings from fear to shame to loneliness, the reactions of neighbors, the reactions of families. Because if someone initiates a divorce, someone is horrified. Someone else feels you've just killed off my son or daughter. So that there are couple issues, but then we know they become larger family issues.
that's right. That's
And so, well, let me back up and say, what is the major prompt for a woman to find you online and say, I think I need one of these groups?
Great question. So, women oftentimes in my first session with them, they will say to me, Una, how is it possible that 50% of marriages end in divorce and I don't know anyone going through it? So,
Mm,
I think divorce can be a very lonely and isolating situation, even though it's so common. And I think they feel great relief to then know that they can be in a room with other women who are really going to get it. And I think if you haven't been through divorce, it's harder to understand somebody's experience. And so people come to me and they say, I have wonderful friends, I have a supportive family, and they just don't get it.
mm,
And when you were mentioning all those feelings before, I really think that there's a roller coaster of feelings that people go through. And one of the really important things about being in a support group is that all of those feelings are welcome in the
mm,
group. So
mm,
somebody might come in one week and say, I am so angry at my ex. And there's also this little part of me that misses him too, or misses her too.
mm,
And they may not be able to say that to their sister, right? Because their sister's so angry at the ex. And what do you mean you miss him? You shouldn't be missing him. He did a terrible thing to you. But in the group, the people can really understand, the other members can really understand the nuance of the feelings that are
mm.
involved in divorce.
It's making me think of having run groups, not
Mhm.
necessarily divorce groups, for years, how often men used that as a platform to talk about being in the middle of a divorce
Yes.
and seeking some. They couldn't tell people at work. They didn't tell the buddies they played basketball with, but they didn't quite know how they could carry it without telling someone. And inevitably, someone has had a divorce. Particularly women in the group were very responsive at times
Uh-huh.
to the
Uh-huh.
to the man's dilemma. But I think you and I, as group people, know everyone in the situation could benefit from a supportive setting where people are saying, "I get it. It's not
Exactly.
it's not easy, but I get it."
That's right. That's right.
Mm.
And my groups are really primarily to support the emotional journey of divorce. Um, and I think people feel very relieved when they walk into the room and see these are people who are really going to get it.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it's a non-judgment zone.
Do they use the groups also for information like legal information or how to proceed or things like that?
They definitely trade legal and financial tips as well and really get a lot from that. Again, the primary purpose is the emotional support, but they definitely get legal and financial tips too.
Mm. Now, have you had women who've said, I waited till my kids were in high school, or I waited till my kids went to college? Um, and do they seek? I'm sure they do. Let's talk about the kids, from whether you have a kindergarten little one or someone who just started college. It's hard for kids to come back. I was mentioning in our preface before we started, and I'll share it with our listeners. There was one summer that one of my son's friends came home here. Everyone played basketball in our yard, and he said, Mrs. Phillips, my parents are getting a divorce. They've already sold the house. I am not going with them to live in the new condo. I'm living here. So this was like, I could feel this kid's anguish. I thought,
Sure.
wow, this is something, Jimmy. So for children to come back and not be prepared, I mean, let's talk a little bit about if
Mm,
I'm divorcing someone who I really can't be with him anymore, and I waited for Jimmy to go to college. Now what do I do? He doesn't want to live with us. He's
right,
blaming both of us. And or it's little ones who all of a sudden say, how could I play Little League if Daddy's not here?
right,
So,
right.
okay, let's talk about kids. Let's
Yeah, I
share
mean,
some wisdom.
it's tough with kids because there's no best time, right? I mean, no kid wants their parents to get divorced, and yet also no kid wants to live in a house where their parents are either constantly at each other, right? They're in a hot war with each other,
Right.
or they're silent and chilly and tense and they're in a cold war with each other, right? So, I mean, the old research about divorce and kids said that divorce is bad for kids, and that's it. And the new research really says it's not divorce per se that's bad for kids, but it's conflict and ongoing conflict that's bad for kids.
Hmm.
So I think there are a lot of people who decide they're going to wait until their kids go off to college. And, if they're waiting a very long time for their kids to go off to college, that may not be so good for the kids to be
Hmm.
living in a home with that much tension. Um, and going off to college is a time where you want your kid to be focused on their friends, their social life, their studies, their extracurriculars, not, oh my God, how is mom doing back at home? How's dad doing back at home? Where am I going to have Thanksgiving? What's going to happen? Um, there's no ideal time. There really isn't. And yet it's not ideal to live in conflict either for kids.
Well, so often the conflict leads to contention, which leads to calling each other really unbearably despicable names. Or so I've said to people, just remember, whatever you think she did, whatever you call her, your children now have absorbed that term.
That's right. That's
And it goes back and forth. If they're living in a house where the names of the parents are really obscene or so negative, that little one's part of that guy. That little one's part of that woman.
That's
So
right.
if you can't contain the tension and the fighting, isn't it better for everyone
Yes.
that we decide to live apart? And there are many couples who you have to respect. They come up with really some fine plans. They share the child care. They try to do their best with the extracurricular, but it is no easy task.
Correct. Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, it's definitely best, and I think, it's best if the parents, and oftentimes this is true, that once they're not living together anymore, they can be more amicable. I mean, some people are much better meant to be co-parents than they are
Yes.
romantic partners, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
the very sad cases are people who can't be romantic partners and they are still so upset, angry, betrayed that they also can't be co-parents
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
are struggling with mental illness or something where they really can't be co-parents. And that's the saddest case.
It is.
Yeah.
So tell me, sometimes we talk about stages that kids go through when they're dealing with this divorce. What, talk about that a little bit, Ona.
Great. Yeah, I think both parents and kids go through stages. And one of the things that happened, Suzanne, when I was writing this book is I got to the chapter where I wanted to write about a stage model because I do think that divorce is a journey. And so I think it's helpful to have a map, right? When you're going on a journey and to know where you're going. And like any stage model, we know people don't go through stage 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 in exact order and never go back and forth. We know that stage models are a basic structure that we can think about, but you don't end stage 1 on a Tuesday and begin stage 2 on a Wednesday, right? So as I was looking at the literature on the stages of divorce grief, what I found was that everybody, or most people, were using the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stages of grief for when a loved one dies. That was a model that was made in the 1970s. And it's a useful model for grief. Certainly, it's not perfect. No model is, but it's useful for grief. But it didn't really work so well for divorce grief. And so I really began to think about the literally hundreds of women that I have seen through the divorce process and think about what are the stages that they went through when I saw them in the group. And that's how I came up with my model. And I think it fits for the adults as well as for the kids. And so my stage model begins with heartbreak. Whether you initiate the divorce or not, it's still heartbreaking. It's not what you planned when you got married.
Right, right.
And so that's where the stage begins. And that's true for kids as well, right? The
Mm-hmm.
heartbreak of, but I thought we were always going to live together, all of us.
Right, right.
Um, and then the next stage is something we touched upon a little bit already, which is the roller coaster of feelings and the way in which your feelings can go up and down and be angry and sad and worried and fearful, and relieved
Mm-hmm.
also, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can have all of those feelings in one day and sometimes in 1 hour. And I also think that the court system really can exacerbate
Oh,
that roller
yeah.
coaster of feelings because the court system is not really designed with people's feelings in mind.
Yes, right.
Something to do to make a business deal between people and divide up assets and
Mm-hmm.
make a parenting plan, but they're not really designed with people's feelings in mind, and they're not very efficient. And so the the court system can really exacerbate the roller coaster.
I think that some lawyers can also, and that's why when people ask for a referral, you want to choose someone really smart, but someone who has compassion for everyone in the story.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I
because
think, yeah, after roller coaster, then comes mending. And mending is really a time, I picture mending in my own mind as like taking a needle and thread to your heart. You're mending up your heart because your heart's been broken. And it's really a time where people begin to focus more on themselves than on their ex. They really lean into more self-care for themselves and maybe start to think about what other relationships they have and how to renegotiate some of those relationships. And then after mending, I think really comes letting go. And letting go not only of the marriage, and this is important, it's not only letting go of the marriage, but it's letting go of an identity,
yeah,
identity as a married person, an identity of being somebody who's in an intact family, right?
right.
Maybe a sociocultural identity as well, or a socioeconomic identity. So there's a lot of letting go that happens in divorce. Sometimes people have to let go of their in-laws, even if they've been married a very long time and they love those in-laws. You
Hmm.
know, So that's a hard time. And then the final stage, I think, is really moving on. And in that moving on stage, it's not that you forget about being divorced or the divorce isn't part of you. The divorce is always going to be part of your story. But I think moving on means you're putting your energy into something that's different than your marriage or your divorce.
You
Really
can,
investing.
yeah, and I'm sure you've seen it, and I've seen it over the years. Whereas at the beginning, the person is enraged
Yes.
with the ex, and
Yeah.
everything is about the hate and the disappointment. But with
Devastation.
the moving on, you start to see a compassion,
Yep.
and you're happy he had a good time at the game with the kids, and the kids feel that shift. But it does
Oh,
take some time. It
it
does
takes
take some
time.
time.
Yep.
The other thing that I think really underscores the importance of your group is when you lose one identity, like, okay, I'm not part of a couple anymore, you are really in need very often of another type. So if I'm one of the women in the group, my parents were divorced when I was in college, and my mother joined a group called Parents Without Partners, even though we were not little ones, but they became some of her best friends. It was male and female.
Right.
Everybody had a story.
Yes.
Everybody wanted to cook for everybody.
Yes.
But that was a new identity that helped the loss of the original identity of being married people. These were people,
Absolutely.
yeah. So,
Yeah, it's a
so,
group.
and,
It's a
and
group model.
yes. And
Yeah.
sometimes I even want to say to our listeners, and if you have a very caring group that plays tennis and it's a mix of married and not married, perfect.
Yes.
Groups, we both are group people. Now, your group really gets to the issues of divorce, which is why it's so important. But maybe it's also a platform for people realizing, well, I'm in that woman's group. I think I'm going to join a tennis group, or I think I'm going to do. So it really probably builds their confidence, Una, in terms of going back into social groups.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It builds their confidence. It helps them to know how to talk about their feelings and their feelings about the divorce. And it's very empowering. Um, we
Well,
really
oh,
celebrate the empowerment.
well, how many times have you heard? I've heard people say, "What she said is what I wanted to say," or
Yes.
what she said is what I need."
Yes.
I mean, someone puts to words a feeling you have never put to words, but you have, and
Oh,
that's the magic of the group.
it really is. And that happens all the time in these groups.
Yes, yes, I'm sure it
Really,
does.
really wonderful. I love the fact that when they first come to the group, they feel so terrible about themselves, and they expect that everybody in the group is going to be kind of a loser because they feel
Oh,
terrible about
wow.
themselves.
Okay.
They walk in and they think, oh my God, wait, these are actually like really smart, attractive, you know,
Yes, yes,
successful women.
yes, that's
Then the
terrific.
transformation of them thinking, oh, we're all smart, attractive, successful
Yes,
women, right? Right. So
right.
I love that part.
Yeah. All right, we're going to take a brief break. You've been listening to Psych Up Live, and today we're with our expert, Una Metz, the author of the upcoming book, Unhitched, Essential Divorce Guide for Women. And that's coming out by Simon and Schuster this January. Listen into some of the invaluable advice that she'll be sharing. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm here with Oona Metz, and she's the author of the upcoming book, Unhitched, the Essential Divorce Guide for Women, which you can order ahead. I'll be telling you about that later. The question I'm asking Oona now is the big question. How do you tell kids that you're going to file for divorce, that you're going to leave their mom or dad? How do you even do this?
It's such a good question, Suzanne. And I think it's one of the most heartbreaking things that parents do over time. And I do have a lot of thoughts about it. And one of the thoughts I have about it is to think about the timing. It's not helpful for kids to have a very, very long time to think about this if their housing is not going to change. So to say to a child, we're going to get divorced in a year, or we're getting divorced now, but I'm not going to move out for a year, it creates too much tension. You also don't want to tell them the night before, right? Somebody
Right.
moves out, but you want to be thoughtful about thinking about giving kids a little bit of time, but not too much time before you tell them about a housing change. And remember that kids appropriately are going to be thinking about themselves. So one of the things they're going to want to know is, how does this impact me? Right?
Right,
Where
right,
am I going to live?
right.
Am I still going to get to see my pet cat every day? Will I still live in the same neighborhood? And so trying to figure out as much as you can, and some of that you may not be able to know when you tell your children, but figuring out as much as you can beforehand. The other thing I think is very important is that if at all possible, it is a united front between the two parents telling the
Mm,
child, that
mhm.
not one parent tells instead of the other. And if at all possible, that you say, we have made the decision, so that one parent doesn't get blamed
Mm.
for the decision. So those are some really important things to kind of keep in mind. The other thing I would say is, I think people get very nervous about this initial conversation, and I like to reassure them that they can keep this conversation pretty short.
Right. Okay.
They're going to have a lot of conversations about the divorce over time with their kids at different developmental stages, at different times when their kids are processing it. And so I think in the very beginning, a shorter statement is better than sitting your kids down for an hour
Oh,
to tell
right.
them all about why you're divorcing. They don't need to know the specifics about the adult conflicts. They need to know something. So I suggest that people say, we've been trying for a while to improve our relationship and we're not making each other happy anymore. And you might have noticed that.
Mm,
Um,
really good.
and
Really
that
good.
we will always be your parents. We will always love you. Those are two things that are never going to change. This is not your fault. This is an adult problem. It's not a child problem. Um, those are all really important things to keep in mind.
Love you. That's not going to change. It's an adult problem.
Mhm.
We're still going to be here for you.
Yep. Yep.
So,
And we want to
Trish,
hear about your feelings, no matter what they are. If you're mad, if you're sad, we want to hear about it now, and we want to hear about it later. We're available.
so the later is good as well as the now, because sometimes the child can't even process it. So they don't have a big, response back. And so
That's
the
right.
parents have to know if they feel a little bit sidelined by this or a little shocked by it or very scared by it, the chances are they're not going to say, well, let me let you know how I feel now. That's not likely.
Right, right,
Some
right.
teenagers, maybe. But
Yeah.
so let's go with someone who has a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old. What
Mhm.
do we tell that age group? How do we handle that?
I think using really age appropriate language and saying, so mommy and daddy or mommy and mommy um, have not been getting along for a while and we haven't been making each other happy. And so one of us is going to go and live wherever the place is, in this apartment or whatever. And we're gonna make sure that you still see us every single week. um, And we know that you're going to have a lot of feelings about this, and we really want to hear what your feelings are, and we're going to keep you posted.
Mm.
Uh, we're going to let you know along the way what's happening and, when you're going to see each of us.
I think, and you certainly reflect it, most parents want to speak about this in a way that does not harm or in any way really traumatize their child. So
Absolutely.
they're
Yeah.
eager
Yes.
for the conversation. Now, what we all know about these kind of conversations will be that you'll ask the child, do you have any feelings about what I say? And they'll say no. Good chance
Uh-huh.
they'll say no.
Right.
But somewhere 2 weeks from that, when you're buying Carvel or ice cream, someone will say, why are you and Daddy doing this? Out of
Yeah.
the blue, it's
That's
possible
right.
it may come. And
That's right.
so you have, it's really, you've opened an ongoing dialogue that's really important to be able to keep picking up along the way.
That's
Because
right.
sometimes they'll tell a friend if they're a junior high school kid. If
Mhm.
they're little, they wouldn't know how to tell a friend.
That's right.
So in some ways, it's just like the divorce process is an ongoing process. This discussion is an ongoing discussion.
Absolutely. And I would also add that for very young kids, they may not be able to tell you how they're feeling with their words, but they may be able to tell you with their behavior.
Yes.
So you may see a regression in behavior. You may see more anger or more fear or more sadness. And I think just being as present and loving as you can while still keeping boundaries, right? Um, and structure for the child, but being really understanding that when that kid is crying because, their grapes fell on the floor,
Right.
there that might be a helpful discharge for them,
Mm.
that
Uh,
really has more to do about the loss of the family than the loss of the grapes.
yes, yes. A
Yeah.
million years ago, I was a graduate student, but I was assigned to work on a naval base and work with children. And so I had a dollhouse and all the things one uses for play therapy. And one little boy just kept setting everyone up in the dollhouse and then throwing the father out the window. So this was my clue
Yes.
that something was not going to be
Things
stable
going
there.
on.
But
Yeah,
so that's it. You look for it wherever the little ones can find a way to
that's right.
somehow voice it, act it out. And if you're patient, they eventually find the words because it's actually you provide it for the mothers. One of the things that I think is the big, big benefit of your groups is that if you make the mothers feel stable and safe and
Yes.
okay, that's
Yes.
going trickling down to the rest of the
That's
group.
right. That's right. And we talk about parenting all of the time
Oh,
in
great. Yes.
because almost all of the group members are mothers. And so that's something that's very near and dear to my heart is making sure that people are parenting well through this crisis. And we really talk about it. And, it's interesting what I have found is that sometimes, especially if there's been conflict in the home, sometimes the kids, it doesn't take very long for the kids to actually do better once the parents announce.
Oh,
Are
yeah.
so nervous and worried that their kids are going to do worse. And sometimes they do for a little bit. It's stress. It is a big family change. And so sometimes the kids do worse. And oftentimes it doesn't take very long for the kids to start doing a lot better. There's some level of relief, like, oh, now I understand
Yes.
what's going
It,
on.
it, it makes
Now we
meaning.
can adjust
Yeah.
to a new situation rather than just being in that constant tension.
Oh, well said. Because
Yeah.
they're living with it. They can't
Yeah.
make sense of it and they can't
Right.
get away from it.
That's right. That's right.
The one thing that we mentioned before is in terms of problem solving of logistics.
Hmm.
I mentioned that I once was working with a couple and the male, they were a new couple. They both had divorced their spouses and they were school age and junior high school kids. And he decided it would be fine if we just put the boys together in one bedroom, the girls in one bedroom. And when her children heard about this, they said, we are not going to live in a bedroom with a kid we don't know. Um, and he kept saying this is not right, but they hadn't thought of letting the children solve this.
Right.
You know,
Right.
showing the floor plan and asking, okay, what do you think would work? And it
Hmm.
turned out the siblings wanted to be in their own room. The
Uh-huh,
boy didn't
uh-huh.
want to be with a boy he didn't know.
Right.
Hello. So
Yep.
the more you can appropriately integrate the children into the new plan, then they have a stake in it.
Right. And I would also say slowly.
Yes.
When you're in a new relationship and you have kids, you really have to, it's really important to move slowly. Even though you may want to move quickly because you're in love and so on and so forth. Well, your kids are not in love
Right.
with your new honey or your new honey's um, children. You know, your kids see that as potentially a threat, and so it's
Yes.
very important to move slowly. And wonderful things can happen in step families,
Mm.
absolutely. But I think people really need to go very slowly and really pay attention to what the kids need in that transition.
Have
Just
any of your group, female group members, ever said, my ex is looking for a male group like this? Has it come up that people are asking you for other group, groups for the other partner?
yeah. It's interesting. th there aren't a lot of groups for men out there, and I think the ones that do work tend to be more shorter term.
Okay.
My groups are ongoing groups, and people come in a minimum of 6 months. I've had people stay for 3 years
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
group. And I think that there's a way in which men want to get, kind of move through the pain
Mm-hmm.
much more quickly. And unfortunately, that sometimes means that it's not processed. So I think having groups for men would be a great, great benefit for them.
Yeah, I could understand. They want the didactic and they want the what do I do now?
Yep.
But what your women have found is an emotional safety place, an
Yes.
emotional group that becomes like a really, really important part of their emotional healing.
Yes. Yes.
Um, mm.
Able to do the work of the grieving in the
Yeah,
group.
yeah.
Um,
The other thing is that, group people like ourselves, we should think of offering this because you never know in terms of men, especially maybe younger men, wanting to have a place of their own to discuss this with other men.
that's right.
Um, so, it's an interesting thing. Let's talk about, I love the way you say it in the book, ready, set, date.
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
let's talk about dating. I mean, how dare I date if my kids are now going to meet another man and what another woman and what is this going to mean? So what do you guys say about dating?
Well, one thing I say about dating is that it's really important to date yourself first before you date another person.
Okay.
Because I think, especially for women, women are so socialized to think about and care about and take care of the other people in their lives, right? So they take care of their spouse, they take care of their kids, they take care of their people at work. They're real caretakers, which is great, but sometimes it means they don't think about themselves enough or
Right.
care for themselves. And so when you get out of a marriage, especially a marriage that didn't work, and so you got divorced, I think it's really important for people to spend some time really thinking about what do you like? You know, not what
Yes.
is your spouse like or what are your kids like, but what do you like? What do you like? What do you like to eat? What do you like to do? What do you like to wear? All of those things. I had a woman one time and her spouse hated it when she wore overalls.
Okay.
And so she came into the group and she was strutting around in this great pair of overalls,
That's
and
too
it was
good.
beautiful to
Yeah.
see her kind of light up in that way, right?
Yeah.
So I think first dating yourself before you date somebody else. And then the other thing I say is, you have to be careful after a divorce because your heart is tender, right? And sometimes that initial heartbreak after a divorce can be really that can be really hard.
And just to your point, many women, when they do decide to date, meet a man who's just divorced and he wants to use them as his therapist. And he wants them to advise
Mhm.
and he wants her to advise him on how to deal with his teens. And he wants to, so that sometimes,
Huh?
you have to be very, I'm loving what you say, very careful that you didn't just take
Right.
on another whole dynamic of a family with problems.
That's right.
Now you're
That's
trying to take care of yourself. I'm loving that there's got to be room for taking a look at who you are and what you need so you know the next time you connect, it's with someone who really is a match in some
That's right.
way.
That's right. And
Yeah.
if you get comfortable being on your own, then you're not going to feel desperate to pick the first person who comes along, right?
Well,
You can be much more picky and do a really good pick if you're very comfortable being on your own.
absolutely. Then it will be choice and not need.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's
You know,
it's
Suzanne, it's interesting. During this time that we've been talking, I feel like we have really touched upon so many of the difficult or stressful or heartbreaking parts of divorce. And I do want to just mention that um, my own feeling about divorce is that yes, it's very stressful and heartbreaking. And, that it can be a really remarkable opportunity for growth and for healing, for empowerment, for transformation. And, there is this research out there that shows that 75% of women who are divorced really do not regret their decision at all. And that is true even though their family income goes down. Their childcare responsibilities often go up. But I have found that women are oftentimes um, quite happy after divorce. That's not true for everybody, but for many, many people, and I think especially the people who do the work of grieving, they can really be happy. And I think
mm,
it's so hard to know that when you're in the very first stages, right? It's so hard to imagine, oh my God. But I have so many people who come to me the first session and they say, this is the worst thing that could have ever happened to me. And by the end, they say, I thought this was the worst thing that could have happened to me, but it turns out it was the best thing that could have happened to me.
well, it's so interesting you say this because I say to people I should have the before and after pictures on the wall.
Yes.
And that based even just on my mom, apart from I've been doing this so long, hundreds of people I've seen, it very often is the journey from oh my God to thank God.
Yes, that's right.
And it is remarkable. The
That's right.
before and after pictures are remarkable.
And you really can't convince anybody who's in the oh my God stage
That's right.
they're going to get to
Because
thank
they're
God
in pain. They're
in
really in
pain.
pain. I
And
think that's
it's
true of men
important.
too. Yeah.
Yes. And it's important to recognize that and acknowledge that. And yet, luckily we know and we can carry, both the hope that things are going to get better for them with the acknowledgement of how painful it is.
Mhm.
That's also one of the wonderful things about the group and the way in which so I have people at different stages of divorce in my group. Um, and the people who are further ahead really offer so much hope for the people who are newer to the
Mm,
process. And the people who are newer to the process offer a wonderful perspective to the people who are further along, because the people who are further along can look at the newer people and say, oh my God, I remember when I was at that
that's
stage.
right. That's
Boy, I've
right.
come a long way.
Well, that's the power. The power of group is in helping the new person. You really do also help yourself because you remind yourself of your journey. But sounds like your groups are wonderful. Um, just now, even though we may talk a little bit more, how would people find out about one of your groups, or what's the best way for people to do that?
So my website is really the best way. It's www.unametz.com. And in addition to finding out about the groups, I have a lot of free resources on my website. So I have information about online support groups. I have book recommendations there. I have articles I've written. I
Oh,
have other
great.
podcasts I've been on. So a lot of free resources. So anybody is welcome to come to unametz.com and just you know, check out whatever is useful to you.
And we also know people can pre-order your book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. So my book, which is called Unhitched, The Essential Divorce Guide for Women, it's coming out January 13th, 2026, but it's available for pre-order now at Amazon, at Barnes& and Noble, at Target, at your local bookstore. So it would be great if you want to go ahead and order it and be able to get the first copy hot off the press.
Yes. So, I want to give us a take-home message. Give our listeners a take-home message about this journey of divorce.
My take-home message would be don't do it alone. Find your tribe, find your people who will understand what you're going through, whether that's a therapist, a friend, a support group, but find the people who will really understand and support you as you go through this. And as you and I were talking about before, it is really hard in the beginning, and it does get better. I promise it will get better.
Okay. I want to thank you for joining us today. You have so much in the way of experience to share with so many. I'm hoping our listeners contact you and get the benefit of the wonderful material on your website, and that we're all waiting for this book. We really are. I
Thank
want
you
my,
so much. Thank
ah,
you so much for having me, Suzanne. It's
oh,
really been such a pleasure talking to you.
same here. For my listeners, I want to thank you. And remember, you can hear this and any prior show as a podcast on my host site, my website, and on the podcast app of your iPhone on all the platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, Amazon Audible, Google Play. If you have a question, please contact me at radiohostphillips@gmail.com. Until next week, please be safe. Thanks.